Hi, journeyers. Welcome back to A Journey Through NYC Religions Television. I'm Tony Carnes, your host. In April in 2024, I was awakened past midnight with the news that students had taken over a building at Columbia and taken a few hostages, which they quickly released. Then the next morning, I got a call from the administration saying, don't come in for your seminar on religion and the seminar on the social sciences because we're shutting down the campus. And I thought to myself, well, religion is so much at the heart of this controversy over Hamas versus Israel that that's probably right where I should be. But I also know religion is not necessarily even popular by those who take some cause, like the Hamas cause or the Palestinian cause. Many times the people that take that won't let religious people speak. They're really only interested in the politics. This problem of the inability of people of faith to have a voice on the public square and the workplace has been a concern from ours from the very beginning. And I heard that there is a broadcaster, really a great broadcaster, that had broadcast with Channel 13, WNBC, WNYC, Univision, and that he had come to the conclusion that we're in a social crisis where it is very hard for people of faith to have their voice be heard. His name is Rafael Pi Roman, and we're really glad to have him because he does such great work and thoughtful work. Welcome to the program, Rafael.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for those kind words, too.
You know, I'm just going to throw you in the pot here.
Okay.
People say there is sort of a sour mood in the public so that people no longer feel they have to treat each other with respect or to talk to each other. How do you think we got here, and what is it? What's causing it?
I think how we got here is also how we got to that situation that you were in Colombia. And I interpret it as religious in this sense, which I think that at the basis of it is intersectionality, which I believe is in effect an extremely rigid, unforgiving religion.
What is intersectionality?
Intersectionality is the ideology that came out of the universities. The popular term for it, I suppose, is wokeism. You know, but at the essence, without boring you, and because it takes a long time, and it's also, although simple, complicated. I mean, basically, it divides people into levels of oppression. You know, at the least oppressed, of course, it's white people, privileged white people, and it goes down from there, and it's divided into many things. And I think at the heart of what happened in Colombia, what people are calling a rebirth of anti-Semitism, and I fear that it is, but it's different from the anti-Semitism that existed in Germany in the 30s. There the Jews were looked at as subhuman because they weren't white. But while now they are the enemy, at least the Zionist, the Israel Jews, which unfortunately bleeds out to all Jews from what I've seen, because they are white, because they are at the top of the hierarchy in this intersectionality. You know, they're the white colonial oppressors oppressing the oppressed people of color, the Palestinians. I think it's a false ideology. It's a false image of what's happening there. But I think in large part, we've got where we are, the sour mood, the divisions, the separations among people because of this ideology, which I first encountered at an Ivy League school in 2015, and it gave me chills. I knew at that moment, it was going to spread out. I didn't know it was going to spread out so fast and so overwhelmingly.
You know, we have a professor at Columbia, a linguist that calls this woke religion. I think he published a book on it, John McWhorter.
Oh, of course, yes, I know him. Yeah.
And I'm wondering, when you went down there to Princeton, what happened?
You know, I'm Cuban, and I think we might talk about that. And I lived through the last, you know, I spent some years in Cuba under the revolution. And my one day in Princeton in 2015 was the closest thing. I've had many experiences since, but that was the first time that I felt in this country like I did when I was a kid in Cuba under the Castro regime, which is, you know, a fear, you know, a rigorous, where people were afraid of each other, were afraid of saying the wrong thing, were afraid of being ostracized, what now they call canceled. I mean, people, everyday common language, when people accidentally used it in that environment, they were stopped, they were yelled at, they were said, don't use that term. They were inventing a language.
Did they yell at you, or?
No, they didn't, because I pick up, you know, a fast learner. I said, whoa, let me see. I can't say that. I can't say. So I tried to say the least amount possible. I gave my presentation, and you know, I skedaddled.
It's sort of like playing one of those video games, old-fashioned ones, where the ball goes back and forth, and you're trying to avoid all of the boings.
You know, I have to say, I dodged every bullet. Every dodgeball. But
now that's it has a religious background, that university. Did you sense that they were very
again in the sense that I mentioned earlier, there is a religious element to this. You know, when they talk of, as we were talking about, one of the things I did in my previous life, in my younger and more vulnerable years, I was an organizer for ACORN, Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, which was an organization that was created to organize poor working people in communities where they existed, Black, white, Hispanics. And I was able to do this in Jacksonville. I was able to bring together African Americans who had pictures of Martin Luther King on their wall, and poor working whites who probably, I don't know, you know, or had been at one point Wallace supporters.
Right.
You know, and my idea was that, from my Catholic background, my Christian background, was that this was the reform, this was the world we wanted to create.
Well, let me talk about that resource you just mentioned, because we're really talking in some ways about what resources do we have in the present age. You go back roots all the way back to Cuba. Mm-hmm. Did you have faith roots also, or? Yeah,
you know, I was born Catholic, and you know, Cubans were overwhelmingly Catholic. I was baptized, and my parents, my mother was religious. And when we moved to the United States, I went to Catholic schools. From 4th grade to 12th grade, I went to Catholic schools.
But like a lot of times, that doesn't take.
It didn't take, and in fact, you know, this was in the. I hate to age myself. My wife hates it when I tell dates about my life, but I said my white hair, that dates me. But in any event, it was the 60s when I went to high school. You know, revolution was in the air. So we were, you know, and I was kind of a radical kid anyway. So I questioned everything. And so, of course, they were telling me they were.
Did you ever try to take over the school?
No, I didn't try to. That would be too fatiguing. I was kind of lazy too.
Oh,
I just kind of mock people, you know. That's too hard. That's the hard work.
Your parents could now say, "We were so glad you were lazy." but as you grew up and you started becoming involved in the politics.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the way, and while you were doing this, you're really affecting some of your parents' values of caring for people.
You know, I think so. And, I think my mother always was, you know, like I was telling you before, it's a canard, it's a mistake. Most people, at least people who know anything about the Cuban Revolution, imagine that Cuban exiles were all conservative, Batistans, you know, and that the revolutionary state in Cuba. But no, most political prisoners in Fidel Castro's jails were revolutionaries. Mm-hmm. Some of them were his close comrades. Mm-hmm. You know, and my mother was a progressive, and a lot of people who came to the United States were progressive. So, I had that, but I think, you know, my Catholic, my Christian background, there's underlying, you know, a sense of, you know, giving to others, you know, where we want to create a community of love. That moved me into political activist area, with the religion not being part of it.
And then when you came to college, you came to New York at some point after college, then graduate school at NYU, film school, video, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Then you went through and started having a really successful career. You started as a labor union organizer. That sort of led your way into television. Yeah. But at some point along the way, you started skating not on the secular ice, but you started moving on to the religious ice.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, it's a very personal story, and I'll tell you. From high school on, it wasn't that I was anti-religious. It was just irrelevant to me.
Did you believe in God or not? Didn't believe at all?
It was. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I didn't.
Did you ever pray? Yeah.
I did sometimes. I did pray sometimes. Especially for others. Not so much for me. But I had shed it because of that thing in the 60s. I rebelled against my religious teachers. But something happened, in 2014, my brother committed suicide. And
I'm sorry.
And it shook my world. But it took me 3 years I lived with it for 3 years thinking that, okay, I got used to it. It was very, and then in 2017, my wife and I went to where I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, Jacksonville Beach. And we drove past the house where I lived. And then I suddenly realized that all the people who had lived there, including my brother, they were all dead. I was the only one who was alive. And I'm telling you, I don't know what happened, but I got to the hotel room and I started crying like a baby and I couldn't stop. My wife got so scared, I couldn't stop. And that was
just so overwhelming coming out.
It all came out. And for that year, I was very depressed. I was faking it to the public when I got home.
Why did you tell yourself to get out of that hotel room and to go to work? Why did you tell yourself?
I just did what I had to do. Okay. I had to survive. I had to make a living, and I knew that I could fake it. And so nobody was the wiser except my wife, because when I got home, I would just lay there catatonically. I'm a voracious reader. I stopped reading, and and the thing that I think was the key, I only watched EWTN,
EWTN
is the Catholic network, which I hadn't watched that much before. And I don't know, maybe one day I was just switching channel. I stopped watching news except for the stuff that I had to do for my work. And that must have had an impact because I started to slowly get out of it.
Who did you watch on EWTN?
It's Ralph Martin. Ralph Martin, it's a charismatic Catholic, and he's a wonderful. He's very compelling, and I watched him more than anything. And
was it sort of just like sitting there and bathing in it, or what was going on?
I don't know. It was. I just didn't want to watch anything else. But that felt good. That felt like I could. That maybe it felt like I was back home, some kind of homecoming. I don't know, but I had read also in the past. I had read a lot of or some of Jose Maria Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei, is an organization where his mission is to people be holy in their everyday work, and I had read that, and I knew that there was the big kind of center of that here, and I remember the date. It was November 27th of 2017. I called it, and somebody who's a good friend of mine now picked up the phone, or he got the message. And he finally called me. We had dinner, and I began to get close to some of the people here, like your producer, and that changed my life.
Your reading started to come back.
Yeah.
What did you start to read?
Oh, one of the things I started to read a lot was Flannery O'Connor, who I had read in college under the professor Lawrence Cunningham, who ended up being the head of the religion department at Notre Dame, but he got his master's from Florida State University, where I was. But he was my teacher, and I studied literature, religious literature with him. and I read Flannery O'Connor there, who I loved. My favorite story is Everything That Rises Must Converge, still is. But I read everything of her again when I started to come out of this thing.
And did you recognize, I'm curious, when you read her then, did you say, well, I didn't notice that about her before, or did you?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
So you actually start opening a whole new world.
Exactly.
I mean, when you start reading differently, start seeing differently, start feeling differently, you've really gone from one world, actually you went from two worlds, one that where you're sort of satisfied, successful, to a very cold world, cruel world, and then all of a sudden you come into a very different world. Well, how come right now our world resembles more that cruel world?
Well, as I say, you know, there's the ideology that I encountered, wokeism. You know, in social media, the two things that have riled emotions more, posts that I've shared or posts that I put originally, were one, wokeism. It makes a lot of people mad when I criticize it, and the other is what's happening on the campuses, and the attacks. I feel on the attacks on Jewish people. You know, again, I know that most of those participating in these events, I know that they're not anti-Semitic, but I feel that the movement is mainstreaming anti-Semitism, is likely to do it.
Well, that's the thing. When you start changing the symbols and levers of the world, so that becomes taken for granted, then whether anti-Semites or not, they are. And in fact, it tends to push all of us that direction.
Yeah. And to answer your question quickly, I think what I encountered in Princeton in 2015, I knew it was going to go out into the world. I didn't know it was going to be so quickly. And I mean, I feared it, and it happened, but I didn't know it was going to be so quickly and so profoundly. And why did that happen? And my thinking is, it's because, I mean, a lot of institutions picked it up, but the most important part of society that picked it up was the corporate world. And the corporate world, of course, picked it up because it's a dividing ideology. And it doesn't cost them a penny. They can be the most woke corporation in the world, and it doesn't cost them a penny of profit.
So you're actually, now this is sort of a new perspective. I've heard some others say this. It started taking a different direction. That is, it's not, not the teachers at the universities primarily, although they may contribute.
They started it.
But it's the money people.
Without the power of the corporations supporting it, making it grow. I mean, Michael Lind wrote a book called Hell to Pay, where he writes about how some of these corporations use the woke ideology, intersectionality, to break union organizing campaigns, because they said, this union's trying to bring you all together, but as you know, it will hurt your ability to support your identity.
But if it's so powerful in the workplace, how can you stand against it? If the top levers, the top guys and top women, or the boards are saying this is essential to our pocketbook, how can you ever change that?
Well, maybe you can't. But one thing is, the vast majority of human beings, certainly the vast majority of Americans, don't believe it. They're cowed to be silent about it, but they don't believe it because it's irrational, it's buffoonish in a lot of ways. And it can't stand the light of reason, but it has a power. It has a power of intimidation, and because it has gone out into all sorts.
Well, let me put this to you. Let's say you went to Columbia University to do reporting on the religion of the woke. And so you go to the Hamilton Hall, which is barricaded, and say, I want to interview you about your woke faith. You're not going to get very far. So
no.
how would you go about it to interview them?
I mean, the first question, the same one you probably would ask is, why are you here? What motivates you? Why this issue?
Yeah. And
they're likely to say, and it's probably in part true, it's a devastation that's going on in Gaza by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, as a result of the attack and the grotesque attack on October 7th. But they'll say it's that. And I would follow up and say, well, how come, were you demonstrating during the Syrian civil war where thousands and thousands died? Were you demonstrating during the Sudan war where thousands and thousands died?
Still are dying.
And are, yeah. And what did you say when the Saudis were bombing and killing thousands and thousands of Yemens? Which is, they still are. Silent about all that.
Okay, but they're going to have an answer to you. They're going to say, well,
I'm not so sure, because I've actually asked some of these people, and hamana to some degree. But you know, then there's the one example, you know, when the Iraqis and the Americans drove the ISIS out of Mosul.
Yes.
The ratio between innocent civilians who were killed to the ISIS military was wider than the killing that's going on in Gaza. I don't minimize the Gaza. That is a motivation for anybody to stop, for anybody to say, why is this happening?
Yeah.
Why isn't this stopped?
Yeah.
There are reasons, you know, you can argue about that, and I don't minimize that in their motivation. But there's something else going on in this hierarchy where they believe they have identified Israel as white, which they're not. If they knew anything really about Israel and Zionism, they would see the different kind of hues that exist among the Israelis, and that they're not a colonizing power. That's all debatable, and I'm willing to debate. But I mean, I think I've seen people who are willing to engage. You know, they're easily mocked, these demonstrators, but among them there's people that I've seen that have the ability to listen.
How about if they ask you, says, well, we don't want you to print certain things that we tell you?
Well, it depends what it was. I mean,
well, they don't want it, they may say something that they know that is what they really believe, but would look bad, but they don't want you to report it.
Well, if they told me and they didn't say, you know, beforehand, you know, off the record, I would say, sorry, this is important to the story.
Yeah.
That would probably end the conversation, but I'm not going to do that.
Okay. So in that case, you haven't won them over, but you kept your integrity.
Right.
And how do you think you say that the titans of industry are really somewhat the cause of this? Well,
without them, it would still be in the universities, and it would probably, you know, bleed out into lower education, into other cultural institutions, Hollywood probably, but without the power of...
So what do we do about it?
You know, as I was saying before, first of all, you know, you tell the truth, you fight it, you say what we're saying here. Even though, as I say, I've lost some friends, literally lost some friends who blocked me because I have said some of these things on Facebook. You say it. I mean, that's a small price to pay, although I'm sensitive about my friends, you know. I don't want to lose friends.
Nobody wants to lose friends.
But you have to be bold. And for us who are Christian, you know, the Beatitudes say, you know, you will be chastised, you will be mocked, you will be hurt, you will be,
Don't you find that being a Christian gives you also puts a target on you?
It puts a target on you, but
let's say when you've been in the media a long time, and probably never, for most of the time, never would have asked this question.
Right.
But do you think that newsrooms like NPR, Current Controversy, you think they're fair to believers?
No, I don't think NPR is, from what I've read from Uri Berliner. He's the longtime producer, Peabody Award-winning producer, who recently left after publishing an article basically saying what's going on there is much less. It's very similar to what we've been talking about. He said
something like that. There was almost maybe one, and he was talking politically, one Republican in the whole out of 80 some odd people.
Well, you know,
do you think that's true? I don't know.
That may be true, but that's not the calculus. That's not the measure that I particularly think is the most relevant. Because, I mean, if you live in New York, you're probably registered a Democrat, no matter what your politics is, because it's a one-party state, a one-party city. You know,
right? Well, how would you measure it?
Yeah, by belief, you know, diversity of opinion, and I think the opinion is not diverse. I've been lucky, and I have to say it because I worked for PBS for all these years, and PBS gets, it all gets branded PBS, and I'm telling you, in Channel 13, no one ever told me what to say or what not to say. Nobody ever called me on the carpet for a political point of view or for an editorial decision, except this, twice, for this reason, because it wasn't diverse enough. The opposite. One time in 2008 in a show, we had a panel that did not include a conservative, and our president, the president of the station, said no. You have to have, and we got Father John Newhouse. We replaced a liberal guy. That was one of the, and the other time was when I did a very tough interview of a politician, very tough on an issue. And the president of the station called me and says, that was kind of one-sided. What he didn't know is that was cut because we had initially had an interview of two politicians from the different parties where we hit them both equally as hard, but one was left out. So I expected the call.
Right.
But see the irony. I mean, it was a PBS station that is lumped in with all this stuff. Yet the two times that anybody confronted me was because we weren't diverse enough in opinion. And that I think that's wonderful.
Now I noticed that it's very hard. There are very few conservative outlets. There's Fox, the Wall Street Journal editorial page. There's Post, but I mean, we're talking about all the same company, but they're really not too many. Well, one thing I hope we can do next time is we need to plot to see how can we get a better newsrooms, because I know that you're really familiar with them.
Yeah.
And there's so many things I'd like to ask you. I mean,
but one of the things we definitely have to do, I know you got to run because I know how time is. We got to get young people involved in this business. Who have diversity of opinion. Now,
if a young person wants to write you and get advice,
I love it.
Okay, journeyers, thank you for being with us. If your kids want to go do journalism and want to get some good advice, we got a guy here. Take care.